Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Lamed Vav in Nizir. Some interesting concepts in today's daf. Today's daf we will learn in memory of my mother, Imi Morossi, Chana Sheinel Bas Ephraim Yehuda Halevi, whose yard site is today, third yard site. Amar Bavu at the bottom of Lamed Hamed Beis. We saw these last few lines in yesterday's daf. We'll start from there again. Amar Bavu, Amar Yochanan. It's important to remember that it's Bavu in the name of Rav Yochanan. That he said, in general, when we talk about eating chazer, eating chaylev, if you had a less than a kazayas of the prohibited substance, and you added some permitted substance to it, I give an example, if you had a non-kosher hamburger, McDonald's, you went into a goyish outlet in America, and you had a piece of a hamburger, let's say you had half a kazayas of a hamburger, and then you had half a kazayas of a bun, which was a kosher bun, let's assume, right? The kosher bun certainly wasn't a treif, and you add it together. Are you chayiv now because you had a kazayas of a treif, a hamburger? No, not really. He says kosher ain't at the mitzafia, so you don't add the permitted portion to the non-permitted portion in order to make it a full kazayas. Chutz mi yisur naz, except for Nazir. Nazir, we said shirayam Torah mishras, because the Torah said if you soak it, if you take the bread like this, maybe we'll see if this goes like a Akiva in our Mishnah, or like others, we'll see that tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. But he says, since it says Mishnah, even if you soak it in there, and that means that we're taking bread maybe which is not the Asr for Nazir, and you soak that in wine which is Asr, so the bread is mashlim because the amount of Isser of the wine. Now we talked about Rabbi Akiva Shita in the Mishnah, whether he was talking about, he might hold this concept of heter mitzaref l'isur when it comes to Nazir. And does he also hold that the Shiur of a kazayas applies to liquid also? He said it could very well be that the isur of liquid, which is usually a revius, is the same as that of kazayas if the liquid has been dried up, coagulated into a solid. If it turned into a solid, maybe it's the same Shiur. But even if you hold that it's not, and he holds, maybe Rabbi Akiva simply holds that the Shiur of a liquid is a kazayas just like that of a solid. So if I have a half a kazayas of liquid and I add a half a kazayas of bread, kosher bread to it, I'm over on a nazir. Notice I mentioned a half a kazayas and a half a kazayas because Rashi throughout here mentions that even if we talk about heter mitzaref l'isur, that you can add heter to make the Shiur of a kazayas for isur, and we're saying that Rabbi Yochanan says that only applies by Nazir, by nothing else. You can't say it applies on chazer or anything else which is treif, anything you can't eat. No, only by normally you have to have a full kazayas to be chayiv. Chatzi shir might be awesome in a Torah to eat it, but to be chayiv you have to have a kazayas, except for Nazir, because the special pasuk says here mishras. That's what we're saying here now. But even when I say by Nazir, you still have to have a substantial amount, at least let's say 50% of the Isser has to be there. You can't say the heter mitzaref l'isur when I have a tiny little speck of Isser and I add, it's like 100th of a kazayas, and I add 99 hundredths of a kazayas of heter to it, like I take a speck of the hamburger, of the non-kosher hamburger, and I took 99 hundredths of a kazayas of bread and added it to it, then it makes it this. It's supposed to be substantial, as we'll see. And Rashi quotes that throughout. It's me mashlim. In other words, you have a substantial portion of the isser. Maybe it's a half a kazayas, and in your mashlim, you complete it with another part. So, any case, Rabbi Avu says that Rabbi Avu and Rabbi Yochanan says it only applies by Nazir. That heter mitzaref l'isur, that a permitted food stuff can be added to a prohibited one to make it into a kazayas. Otherwise, when it comes to non-kosher food, you're not chayiv unless you eat a kazayas. You don't say the heter mitzaref l'isur.
It comes from totally different halachas than
what we're used to. Right. In other words, it's only by Nazir. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Rabbi Yochanan said it only applies by Nazir, the heter mitzaref l'isur, but it doesn't apply to hamburgers or anything else. If you're a hamburger, a non-kosher hamburger, a non-kosher piece of meat, bacon, whatever, in order to be chayiv, you have to have a full kazayas. That's what Rabbi Avu said. Comes along Zeiri at the top of Lamed Vav on today's daf. Zeiri Amar Afsa or B'val Takir. No, there's another issue. We say it every day. Kol Sor B'chol Dvash Lo Saktir Menu Yishal Hashem. We say that in Karbanos. You're not allowed to offer to burn on the Mizbeach anything made out of the yeast, leaven, or honey. Honey, the Vash in Torah usually means date honey, not bee honey. In the Gemara usually means bee honey. But in any case, you can't, you're not allowed to burn that on Mizbeach. Okay, so he says, the Iri says also, you know why? That also is an Isser. There's an Isser, Balta Tikiru, you're not allowed to burn on the Mizbeach any leaven or any, you can't, that's why you have chametz there, or any dvash, lo saktiru. Since it says kol sa'or v'kol dvash, even there also we say that heter mitzvah liyaser. Let's say you had dvash or sa'or less than a kazayas, maybe a half a kazayas, and you mitzvah that with some other thing, some other food which is permitted. That also you'd be high for that too. That's what Zeiri says. Zeiri av sa'or b'bal takiru. So the Gemara says to Zeiri, come on, Rabbi Lazar, are you going like Rabbi Lazar, the Dorish kol, because of the word kol? Rabbi Vu or Rabbi Yochanan, who said that it only applies by Nazir, that's because it says mishras. It says if you soak the bread in the soak anything in wine, there I understand it. Ziri adds on, even the Yisr of kol sor b'chol davash l'sektir menel Hashem applies there also the heter mitzvah Yisr. So the Gemara says, is that like Rabbi Lazar that because you dash and call yochi, if you dash and call linyan chametz nami. By chametz also, and chametz on Pesach was coming up, right? If you eat less than a kazayas of chametz, but you added some kosher, let's say some kosher Pesach matzah to it, you should also be chayv yachid in chametz nami, because there it also says kol machmetzes lo sochelu. Rashi quotes it. Says Einachanami, you're right. According to this, the Iri is going like Rabbi Lazar, and because it says kol sa'or v'kol tavash lo saktiru, it says kol machmetzes lo sochelu. You're right. There too, we say heter mitzvah liyaser, but not in other cases. Only because it says kol. But Rabbi Yochanan says it only applies by nazir, by nothing else. Okay. So that's the case of enechanami. So if that's if the Iri agrees that by chametz you'd also say that because it says kol, so why did he only say af sa'or b'bal takiru, say sa'or and chametz? Because by both of them it says kol. If he says that heter mitzvah liyaser by bal taktiru. And by chametz, so say chametz too. It applies by chametz too. The reason he mentioned it by saor is to exclude from Abaye sheet. Abaye says you don't even have to come on to heter mitzvah when it comes to bal saktiru. The isra of bal saktiru, since there's kol saor v'chol dvash, any amount doesn't have to be kazayas because the pasuk says kol, any amount. So Abaye says you're over on it, aktar, even if it's less than kazayas. Kamash malon. So Zir says no. Ein aktar bachim kazayis. You need a kazayis, but heter is mitzvah liyaser. If I have less than a kazayis of dvash or saor and I burned that on the mizbeach, if I added a little piece of heter to it and I made it up a kazayis, according to Yiziri, you would be chayev because it says kol, and the same thing would be by chametz. Kol machmetz lo sochelu ein achanami. Ziri could say it by chametz too. That you're chayev if you're mixed a little piece of less than a kazayis of chametz with some permitted matzah, and now you have a full kazayas, you're chayiv for that too, according to Zeiri, but not according to Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so that's as far as the chametz goes and Zeiri shita. But back to the main shita over here, Rabbi Yochanan says that normally we don't say heter mitzvah liyaser. If there's something that you can't eat, you're not chayiv unless you eat a whole kazayas. Nazir is different because it says mishras, but nothing else. Not when it comes to non-kosher hamburgers or non-kosher meat, or anything which is non-kosher milk or whatever, it's got to be a full kazayas in order to be chayiv. You don't say heter mitzvah that if I have less than a kazayas, but I added some more food to it, makes up a full kazayas. No, you're not chayiv for that. So says Rabbi Yochanan. Yosef Rav Dimi. So Rav Dimi was sitting, and he repeated this memra of Rabbi Vu and Rabbi Yochanan, this concept that we don't say heter mitzvah except by nazir. We don't, otherwise, for a call to our kul, we don't say it mitzvah Yisrael. Eisvei Abaye. So Abaye is now going to try to prove in the rest of his daf that you do say it mitzvah Yisrael, even by things other than Nazir. Rabbi Yochanan says it only applies by Nazir, by nothing else. Comes along Rav Dimi to say, Abaye is going to say, I'm going to show you it applies by other things too. For example, Truma. Truma, can only be eaten by a Kohen. And it can't be eaten if it's tamei, right? So he's going to ask a case like this. You have a stew, a sauce. It's a sauce made basically of wine, and it's truma, made of truma wine. But you added in some shum and shemen, some garlic and oil, shel chulin. You added in some chulin food in there, like an additional amount of garlic and oil to make it a nice sauce. Mikvah Rashi says is a rota, like a sauce, right, or a porridge or something of that sort of stew. So you put in some spices to add taste to it. You added in some garlic and oil of chulin. Now, a tful yom is a person who's tamei, person who went to he was tamei. Let's say you touched the dead sheretz, one of the 8 sheretz on matame, and you're tamei that day. You have to go to the mikveh. You go to mikveh during the day, and you wait till herav shemesh. You wait till nighttime, and then you're torah. Let's say you just went to the mikveh in the afternoon, but you didn't wait for herav shemesh. It's called a tful yom. Midrabanan, a tful yom is matame like a sheni. In other words, he can make if he touches truma, he makes it tamei or puzzle really, because it can't go another further step, but it makes it what we call that tamei, puzzles it. So let's say here you have this stew that's of truma. It's basically truma wine that you added in some non-truma shum and some garlic and oil, and it's full yom touched part of it. The nugget full mixasan, puzzle and he ruined the whole thing. Rashi says some say that he touched the. Some say that he touched the shum and the nugget full yom mixasan. Some say that he touched the shemen and the shemen and the shum of truma, but he didn't touch the mikvah of chulin in the next case. It's full yom shavin rabbanim, truma. And some say he's really going on the next words in the Gemara. Some say that it doesn't make any difference what part of he touched it because the pot makes it all one big thing. So what happened here was he had basically a truma stew, a truma sauce with some non-truma spices in there, and it's full yom touch part of it. He's ruined the whole thing because it's basically truma. So that's understandable. Let's say the other way around. Mikvah shulin, the stew is made out of wine, which was chulin, which was not holy, wasn't holy at all. Now he touched the garlic and the spices, and the garlic and the spices, they were made out of truma. So he had basically a non-truma stew or a sauce of wine, and he added in shum b'shemen of truma. The nugget full yom exhausted. And now that full yom touched that. This is what Rashi says. Some say that he touched that part of it, the shum and shum, which is truma. And some say he touched even the basic chulin part of the stew, but since they're mixed together in one vessel, it's all combined. So now, if the stew is mainly truma and he touched any part of it, the whole thing is possible because it's mainly truma. If the stew is mainly chulin, but there's a little bit of truma in there, and this tful yom touched part of it, he only ruined that part of it because it's basically chulin. He only ruined that part of it. In other words, he only made that part of it. Why is it puzzle? It's basically chulin with a little bit of truma in there. So why is it puzzle? Now Rashi says, why is it puzzle? Because tumas ochlin is he only touched a little bit, and he didn't touch a whole kibetza, presumably. The ain't tumas ochlin pachas b'kibetza. But this Rashi is very difficult because this is we say tumas ochlin is b'kibetza. That's to be metame some other stuff. To be metame, let's say a liquid. But to be makabel to it should be any amount. So the Rashi here doesn't make sense. Take a look at Tosfos down the page, about halfway down in the white lines. You see Hocha Garsina Rashi, Maka Mago Apostle. He has a different gears than Rashi. Again, could be that what we show as Rashi is not really Rashi, but here you have many times in this Masechet that he quotes Rashi this way. Hocha Garsina Rashi, Maka Mago Apostle, Habitalan Tuvlin. The Tavon is possible. The Ksavar Dimur Rabbanan, the mixtures only Rabbanan, the Aser, Kloma de Medaraisa, Chabetrei Batal, Vadatum Bachadu Meid Rabbanan. What do we say? I've said this many times. Midaraisa, if you've got 2 pieces of kosher meat and 1 piece of non-kosher meat, and they got mixed up together, you can eat them. You can eat it. Why? It's 2 against 1. That's all. You only need a majority. Majority, 51 to 50, it's a majority, works for everything than a Torah. Achri Rab Mahatas. But the rabbis came along and said, no, all kinds of things. That, for example, Davar Shetz Chashuv is not bottle. Davar Shebaminion, things that you count, is not bottle. We have the cloud that Min Bamino is low bottle. Many, pardon? No, St. Tom, we're going to talk about tomorrow, Mirz Hashem. No, St. Tom is not there. Again, it's midrabanan. Midrabanan, no, St. Tom is not batal. What is no St. Tom? Like batal b'shishim. But that's really common. Giving a taste is batal b'shishim. Or we're going to talk about Tom Ke'iker. If you taste it, then it's, to really taste that way, it's like the main thing itself. We're going to get into that tomorrow, Mirz Hashem. But in any case here, so what he's asking is this. Why do you say it's puzzle? Why do you say it's puzzle? If the basic stew over here is chulin, and there's a little bit of truma mixed up in there, so it's batul. It's batul barov, that's all. It's batul barov. What do you need it for? You say that truma is not batul unless it's 1 in 100. Remember we said truma is 1, that's Rabbanan. Klein 1 in 200. We have different rules, right? Those are all Rabbanan. So he says over here, I can say to Rashi again, reading that Tosas. Amai poso, the tavlin, the shum and the shemen are nullified in there. A mixture of truma in something else is only asur rabbananu. The asur klama the midaraisa chabetrei batal 1 and 2 is batal menatar. Vada truma v'chad mei is only rabbanan. So he says, why is it possible? Yom Rabba, why is it possible? It should be batal. Why do you say if the stew is basically chulin and there's a little bit of truma in there that and the tful yom who midarabanan? Rashi says it's full yom shav rabbanan is like a sheni, and he makes a truma. He can make a shlishi. He didn't really. It's the truma should be batal. What's the reason why it's possible? If a non-Kohen eats it, he's going to get malchus. If a non-Kohen eats truma, we understand he gets malchus, but that's only real truma. Here it's mixed up with the other stuff. It's batal. If it's batal, he shouldn't get malchus. My time. And why do you say that? This is all part of Abaya's kasha. Abaya said if you have this case where the chulin, basically a stew of chulin, and there's a little bit of truma mixed up in there, and this full yom touched it, we learn over there in the brisa that he ruins that part. Why should he ruin that part? It should be batal. Not the way Rashi reads it, the way Tosas reads Rashi, that it shouldn't be batal. It should be batal. The truma should be batal. So why would a zar get a non-coin? Why would he get malchus? Rav Yochanan himself said this is all Abaya asking on Rabimi, who brought down Rav Yochanan's memra, that we don't say heter mitzdarf liyasur except for in the case of Nazir. Rav Yochanan himself said matam hol v'zar local, but why would he get kazayis? If a zar eats that part, he would get a kazayis. My time, why would he be chayiv? If he said lav mishum de heter mitzdarf liyasur. You know why? It must be the heter mitzdarf liyasur, meaning I have a little bit of truma, so I have a little bit of truma. Isn't it batal? Yes, but if I have a little bit of truma and less than a kazayis of truma, and I added some heter to it, some chulin to it, makes it into a full kazayis. That's the concept of, like we said, by Nazir, right? That you add a little bit, you have less than a kazayis of isser, of something that's prohibited, whether it's chametz or saor or yayin for the Nazir, and now we're talking about truma, which is prohibited for a zar. But if you add a little bit of non-truma to it, maybe, otherwise why would it be chayav? You said if a full yom who has halacha of a sheni l'tuma touches this mixture, which is only a small portion of his truma, it should be batal. He makes it puzzle, meaning it's tame that it can't go further, can't be betame something else. Why? Why should it be puzzle? He says, because if a zar would eat it, if a non-kohen would eat it, he would get malchus for that. Why would he get malchus? Must be lav mishum dehet mitzdarf liyasur. This is a bias kasha. You said, Rabbi Yochanan, where does heter mitzdarf liyasur apply? Only by Nazir, not by anything else. Okay, Ziri added on chametz and sor because it says kol over there. But you said only by Nazir, not by anything else. Here you see that it applies by truma. That if I have a small amount of truma, why do you say that if a zar, if a tful yom touch that mixture, that part of it becomes tummy? Why? Because that's part's truma. So what? It's batal. Must be that you don't say it's batal because heter mitzdarf liyasur. Omer lei, so Rav Dimi defended himself. Says, "Lo, my kazai. So you know why you said if a zar eats it, he's chayiv malchus for that because he's eating truma. You know why? My kazai the kazai is bechtechilas pras. You know why? Even though the spices over here are a small portion of the stew, but bechtechilas pras, it takes a few minutes, 4.5 minutes, whatever the shiur is, but bechtechilas pras, the amount of time necessary to eat a half a loaf of bread, right? Like 3 beitzim or 4 beitzim, whatever the sheet is. Since if you would eat this stew and you would eat it for 4 minutes, you would eat a kazayis of the truma, even though it's a small amount, therefore you're chayiv. Okay, it says amalei love, not because it's heter mitzvah iser, right? As you have two competing concepts over here. You have, on the one hand, it's bottle. The other hand, no, it's not bottle, because it's not bottle barov even meraisa. You know why? Because you could eat a kazayis. It's not really bottle, because if you ate a kazayis b'chdei achilas pras, you'd be chayiv. That's why you're chayiv malchus. Not because Abaya wants to say it's because heter mitzvah iser. Rav Meir Shapiro said no, that only by nazir but nothing else. So he says no. Rav Dimi defends Rav Meir Shapiro and says no. The reason is not because of heter mitzvah but why? Because you have a kazayis b'cheilas pras. There's enough over here for kazayis. If you would eat it if you would eat this stew, and within, let's say, 4 minutes, you'd eat a kazayis of the truma, that's why you're chayiv. Amalei lo, my kazayis, the ika kazayis b'chdei achilas pras. Says more. So what? So is that a doraisa? If you eat a kazayis of this, it takes you 4 minutes to eat it. You'd be eating kazayis, so you chayiv midoraisa for that. After all, we have the other concept. We have the choretz bottle barov. The achila pras doraisi. Amalei ain't. It is. It is doraisa. It's a concept doraisa. Achilas pras. It's like one of the shiurim of the Torah. The Hachamash Misinai. It's doraisa. Iachi amai pligi rabban aleh. If that's the case, why did the Rabbana disagree with Rabbi Elazar when it comes to chametz? But kuta chabavli is a kind of a mixture. It's a condiment made of sour, dough crusts with milk and with salt, and it's used as a condiment. And the question is, on Pesach was made with crust. It's a small that you eat a small amount. Are you chayiv for that? And Rabbanan say over there that you're not chayiv. Amalei. Rashi quotes the Gemara here. Rashi right where in the beginning of the beginning of the narrow lines in Rashi on this page. The isbei kumina, the nam's got a little bit of bread in there, pieces of bread. The Kamar Bali Ruvo says mixed up v'lo you're not chayiv. If you would eat this mixture, this condiment, if you would eat it for 4 minutes straight, there would be a kazayis there. So why did the Rabbanan say you're not chayiv? If kedei achilas pras, if in other words, I'm not eating bread straight up, but I'm eating there's enough in this mixture of bread or truma, whatever it is that's also that if I would eat it for 4 minutes, I would eat a kazayis, you're chayiv. That's why you get malchus over there, not because heter mitzvah is, but rather because you're eating the thing itself, the truma or the chametz, whatever it is, but they have pras. He says, if it's the Raisa, why did the Rabbanan argue with the Rabbanan and say you're potter over there? Leave. Don't ask me from there. Why? The leka kazayis b'chelas pras. There is no kazayis b'chelas pras. Why? Either kasar v'lei misref, if you gulp it down. It's like, give an example. Rav Shapiro mentioned last night with Chrei, talking about, food that you could send for mishloach manos. He says, why by poor people, it's better to give them money, right? Matanos of Yonim. He says, they're really not of Yonim, even an Ani is that is. There's no rule of Yonim today. It doesn't have to be of Yonim. It's got to be an Ani, but you can give him food too. The reason you give him money is because you don't know what food he needs. He has basically no food. You're going to send him a jar of charei. What's he going to eat it with? He doesn't have any fish, right? You're going to send him different things. You're going to send him some hummus. He's got no bread, to dip it in, So that's why he talks about that. But here is also a condiment like a charain or in this case, this kusachabavli. You don't eat it straight up. You dip in it. So here's the issue. What do you mean? If there would be a kazayis of bread in it if you eat it straight up? He says, why? So you don't ask me from there. Eat it if you gulp it down. But your das, what you've done is voided. That's not the normal way to eat something. You don't eat. Somebody gives you a jar of chrein. Would you just drink the chrein? Just eat the chrein straight up? Same thing over here. You don't eat it straight up. It's a condiment. You add it onto the food. So if you ate it, that's not the normal derech achila. Rashi says, "V'lo chayvu Torah el derech achila." When it comes to eating something, chayv something, you're chayv unless if you let's say you're not allowed to eat the chazer, can't eat ham, let's say, right? And let's say somebody took a kazayas and you just like somebody stuck it down your throat. That's not eating it, right? So here too, it's not the normal way of eating. So if you gulped it down, you're potter because it's not normal eating. And if you dipped in it, you're not going to wind up eating a kazayas within 4 minutes because it's just made as a condiment. You just dip a little bit. You take your bread or your meat and you dip it in there. You're not going to have a kazayis of it within 4 minutes. So either way, you can't ask a kasha from there because you don't have kedechas pras. Eisvei, okay. So again, Abaya is arguing with Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi said he defended Rabbi Yochanan, who said that there is no heter mitzaf liyisr except for Nazir. There is no heter mitzaf liyisr. Abaya is trying to prove you do see heter mitzaf liyisr. First, he tried to prove it from the case of Truma. Why would you be chayav over there? Why do you say that it ruins it? Because Azor, if he ate it, would get malchus for it. Isn't it because heter mitzaf liyisr? He says no. Because there it's achilas pras, you would eat a kazayis of it. If you ate it for 4 minutes, you'd have a kazayis of the truma, and that's why it'd be chayiv. Eisvei another kasha. Shtei maduchas. You have 2 spice mortars. You have 2 little mortars of you crush spices. One mortar has truma spices, and one has non-truma regular chulin spices. Shtei maduchas. Achas truma, achas chulin. V'lafanav shtei kederis. Buy these spices. Why do you have spices? Because you're making a pot of some food. 2 pots. You have a pot of chulin and a pot of truma, and you have spices of chulin and spices of truma. And your intention was, to take the spices of truma, put them into the truma pot, and take the spices of chulin, put them into the chulin pot. But you didn't get a chance to do that. Some kid came in, knocked them over, and you saw one mortar fell into the into one pot, and one mortar fell into the other pot. You don't know which one fell into what. Well, fell into what? It's possible that the truma fell into the chum. You know which is the chulin pot, and you know which is the truma pot, but you don't know which one fell into which. So it's possible that the truma spices fell into the chulin pot. So you have sheikh chulin. You have these 2 pots. One they fell into the other one. Each one fell into one pot, and you don't know which happened. You can eat both of them. Even the chulin pot can be eaten by non-kohanim. Shani, because I say chulin tachul naflu, truma nafla. I assume that the chulin spices fell into the chulin pot, and the truma spices fell into the truma pot. Why would you assume that? If a kazayas within the time of eating, let's say 4 minutes, is an issa deraisa, amayim rina and shani omer. Why do you say I assume that the truma fell into the truma, chum fell through? Maybe the truma spices fell into the chulin pot, and if I would eat that mixture of whatever I made in the pot, some cholent or whatever I ate in there, if I would eat it for 4 minutes, I would have a kazayas of truma. I would eat the kazayas of truma, and for a zar that would be prohibited. So how do you say that? What do you do over there? If you say K'teich is a Raisa, how could you allow that? How can you allow it? So Rav Dimi reported, okay, what do you want to say? You don't hold Achilas Prasas the Raisa? Elamai Hetem Etzaf Yisr? Going back to the Truma and Amad Aleph, you want to say the reason why you get Malchus over there if a non-Kohen ate it is because Hetem Etzaf Yisr? So here also, Amai Amin and Shani Omer. If you say Hetem Etzaf Yisr, so here too, if you had the Yisr of Truma fell into the Chulin pot, so you could say that, let's say a little bit of Chulin, you have a less than a Kazayas of Truma, it got added on with the heter of Chulin, and now the whole thing is, now you're eating Truma straight up. So that would be also, again, if you don't hold of Achilas Pasta Raisa, and that's what I'm saying the reason is, you're saying is because Heter Mitzvah Yisr. Again, a biased point is that Heter Mitzvah Yisr in all cases, not just Nazir. He's asking on Rabbi Yochanan, who said it only applies by Nazir, not by Kolatar Kula. He says, no, you see it applies by Truma, here it applies to Elisha. The reason is because of what? Because Heter Mitzvah Yisr. So over here also, what do you, Abaya, do with this brisa? The brisa says if you have two spice mortars, one of Truma, one of Chulin, and they fell into the 2 pots, Chulin and Truma respectively, you don't know which one fell in. You could eat the Chulin pot if you could eat the Chulin pot even if you're a non-Kohen, and no concern that maybe the Truma fell in. Why no concern? He says, what about K'deches Basas Araisa? So Dimi said, okay, let's assume it's not the Raisa. Your reasoning why the Truma would be also an alpha because of Heter Mitzvah Yisr. Here also you have Heter Mitzvah Yisr. Ella Hanach Trumas Tavon Drabanan. Trumas Tavon is only Drabanan. Midar Raisa, what's Truma? Wine, oil, and the 5 grains, right? Barley, wheat, rye, spelt, and oats. That's it. And wine and oil. That's only Raisa. Fruits, vegetables is only Drabanan. Spices also. What do spices come from? Vegetables, whatever that grows out there. That's also Drabanan. And Rashi explains that by Drabanan, they're not machmer. is it's only drabanan. Right? It's only drabanan, and therefore, right? Rash says for Elamai about Bayamai had himself the Yisra. Asamnam Vikil Mecha still Mika Bidera Hashani Truma Bekazayis Pachad Misha. They had to Mashlim Belkazayis. And I'm from Sarav Rash the last Rash in the page below Daikina Bekazayis Bechel Pras. Forget about it. Yes, I hold Achilas Pras is the Raisa, right? But only by where there's an Isra Daraisa like Truma. This Trumas Tavlin, the Trumas Tavlin is only drabanan, and below Daikina Bekazayis Bechel by drabanan we're not makbara that the Rabbanan hain. The only issur of truma when it comes to spices is only drabanan, and the Rabbanan were not machmir so much that if you have a chilas pras you're chayiv, and therefore they weren't makbid about that. They wouldn't ask, and therefore you can assume that the spice mortar fell into the spice of truma fell into truma, and the spices of chulin fell into chulin, and even if you say that the spices of truma fell into the chulin pot, still a non-kohen can eat the chulin. Why? Because the truma that's only drabanan, and we don't say k'til spras. The issue of spras by a drabanan. Esvei, another kasha, similar kasha, but here we're not talking about spices. Esvei, shteikum, you have two baskets, achas shel truma, the achas shel chulin. Similar kind of thing. You have two baskets of produce, one of truma, one of chulin, and let's say we're talking about grains now. Where's the daraisa? Truma daraisa, right? Assuming now. Shteikubas, achas truma, achas chul. You have two baskets. So name shteik son. In front of these two baskets, you got two large measures, right? Measures of the same grain. Let's say they're both wheat. Shteikubas, achas truma, achas. But then there's two large measures. Achas truma, achas truma. The again, the two baskets, one of truma, one of chulin, fell into the two large measures, one of truma and chulin. We don't know which one fell in. So you say the same thing. They're both mutter. Obviously, the truma is truma, and the chulin is mutter even for a non-kohen, because you assume shani. I assume chulin to I assume the chulin basket fell into the chulin large measure to the psalm, and the truma to truma nafa. Again, Rabbi is asking Rav Dimi, you hold that a kazayas b'sher chapras is daraisa. Why do you say shani omer? So again, before we said Rav Dimi retorted to Abaye, and you hold heter mitzvah for yisur. Again, why would you say if heter mitzvah for yisur? So Abaye now preempts him. Bishlom l'didi and not tafalam zay. Bishlom l'didi. Me Abaye, I hold me and mishum heter mitzvah for yisur. Remember, Abaye is arguing. He's saying heter mitzvah for yisur b'chol tarakula, even by a little hamburger, whatever. The same thing heter mitzvah for yisur. Bishlom l'didi. I mean heter mitzvah for yisur could go in the fish chulin. Here it's different because this saw is such a large measure of chulin, that we don't say heter mitzvah for yisur. Why? Because again, as I mentioned before, when you say heter mitzvah for yisur, it's only if you have a substantial amount of yisur. If I took a speck of a non-kosher hamburger and took a kazayas of bread and added with it, I wouldn't say heter mitzvah for yisur, even if you hold heter mitzvah for yisur in those cases. He says, there's so much chulin over here that I wouldn't say heter mitzvah for yisur. Take a look at the top Rashi on the page. I hold nami heter mitzvah for yisur, not just by Nazir. I say chosin shabbat yisur. You can't say it. There's so much chulin, you can't apply. It applies if you have a little bit of each and there's less than a shear. That's why I say it's got to be probably a substantial amount of isra, like a half a kazayas or more. The examples we always give is a half a kazayas this and a half a kazayas that. So it's got to be a substantial amount. But over here, the chulin is so much, the large amount of chulin is so much more than the amount of truma that you wouldn't say it at all. You wouldn't say it to mitzvah yisra. Chulin is so much chulin. I'm reading Rashi. You have a lot of the Yisr. In other words, either you're talking about a small piece over here, and you have at least half a kazayis of the Yisr, or if there's a big mixture, at least most of it is Asr. The Nefishi mean there's a lot of Yisr. The Kamash Ma'ateh and the Heter is Mashim there. But I forgot the Nefishi there, the Chulin, Tavlin Shiny Hova, Tavlin Taima. Remember, Tom, like you said before, if it's no say Tom, the Tom and the spices give a taste. They give a taste and they give a smell. So it's like there's a lot too. So where do you say heter mitzvah for yisur? If you hold heter mitzvah for yisur only when there's a substantial amount of yisur, or you really have the taste or the smell of the yisur, and the heter is mitzvah after that. So by saying Bishlam, the I hold mishum heter mitzvah for yisur over here, there's no problem because there's so much chulin. we're talking about 2 large measures of grain, and 2 small baskets of grain fell into them, one of truma and one of chulin. We assume truma fell into chulin, and the chulin fell into chulin, because even if the truma fell into the chulin, it's batul, and you don't say over here heter mitzdarf li'aser, because it's a very small amount of truma grain compared to the amount of chulin. But if you would eat 4 minutes of it, you would have a kazayis of the iser of the truma in this case. So to keep so what if there's a lot of chulin? Still, if there's enough that you would eat, you would wind up eating a kazayis of the iser within achilas pras. It should still be usher. So according to you, how does that work? Or Malay. So again, Rav Dimi defended himself. He says, over here, even though this is grains, this is not toplin, but it's bismanazeh. We're talking about a case bismanazeh. Shtei kupas, if you have it today, bismanazeh, it's all rabbanon anyway, and therefore there's no isser, and that's why it applies. So he does hold that achilas pras is doraisa, but they're arguing about this concept of heter mitzdarf li'aser. Again, Rav Abu, Rav Yochanan, and Rav Dimi defends him, says that it only applies by nazir, not b'chol tarakula, and Abai argues that it does apply. So that's sort of the end of the discussion about heter mitzdarf li'aser or not. But then on tomorrow's Gemara, we'll see that Abai asks him from another aspect. Maybe the reason by nazir why it works is not because of tam k'ikar, if it tastes that way. And as if you put wine, let's say you take some wine, nazir's not allowed to drink wine, and he pours it into, dilutes it, puts into a lot of water in there, but you can still taste the wine. Right, and it's also maybe that's a mishra. So if it's soaked in there, maybe that's what the Isur of Nazir is coming, and that could apply even by other Isurim. On the one hand, he said, right, one hand he said, he was arguing with me. He said, "Oh, Nazir, the concept of Nazir is a heter mitzdarf li'aser," and Abaye says, "Oh, why does it only apply by Nazir? It applies all over." So he answered him. Abaye, Radimi gave him all these answers. He says, "No. There's other things that are not heter mitzdarf li'aser. That's because of achilas pras. If you eat it within 4 minutes, you'd have a full kazayis of the iser, not because of heter mitzdarf li'aser." Then on tomorrow's marf, we'll see that Abai asked him from another aspect. Maybe b'chlal by nazir, it's not an issue of heter mitzdarf li'aser, but rather it's an issue of giving a taste. If it tastes the iser, that's why it's usher, and that can apply even by other things. That's what will be the discussion tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. We'll pick it up from here tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody.